All right. So, a couple of things came up today in my on my X feed that I really wanted to talk about because they are showing you the cracks in the dam and the fact that there are people out there, and I include myself in this because I consider this a, relatively later discovery in my personal development, but there are people out there who are touching on the heaviest subjects of our system, right? The system that's run and owned by the club. The club, referencing those who really run the Western society and attempt to run the whole world. And in some cases, have actually had control over most of the world in periods of human history. But because I break it all down to in the club and out of the club on this channel. But anyway, on this subject, this young lady who's very popular on TikTok, somebody posted her a clip of her talking about what's going on with customers and consumers and we're going to shop with intention. So let's just listen to this and see how she's really touching on the concept of the falling rate of profit, and she doesn't necessarily realize it. And then I'll go into a chart that was posted on here that really articulates it, and put a link in the description to Caleb Maupin's great explanation, and maybe I'll play a little bit of it to help explain what exactly this falling rate of profit is, because they articulate it much better than, or he articulates it much better than I do. So anyway, let's have a listen.
Something shifted in this country we just don't talk about enough. We didn't just go from better products to worse ones. We didn't just go from good service to terrible service. We went from being customers to being consumers. And once you see the difference, everything starts making sense. Because those two words don't mean the same thing, like at all. See, when you're a customer, there's a relationship, right? You matter, your money matters, your experience matters. If a business messed up, you could walk. And if enough people walked, that business felt it. Customer service existed because companies needed you to come back. Now, consumers get studied, not respected. Consumers are different. Consumers aren't served, they're analyzed. Your habits, your impulse. What keeps you clicking? What keeps you buying? What keeps you tired but still participating? You're not someone to please. You're a data point to optimize. And this is why nothing lasts anymore. Why quality dropped, why prices went up. Why customer service disappeared behind chatbots and wait times. Because once you're labeled a consumer, the goal is not satisfaction, it's extraction. And before someone says, just shop somewhere else, please. The same five corporations own everything. Different branding, same ownership, same incentives. You're not choosing between options. You're choosing which version of the same system you want to tolerate today. And let's be honest about something else while we're at it. Certain communities weren't treated like customers for a long time. We were ignored, locked out, redlined. And then suddenly we were targeted. Not with quality, with volume, with junk, with debt, with low standards and high interest. That's not inclusion, y'all. That is extraction with a smile. And now it's not just what you buy, it's what you watch, what you react to, what exhausts you. Your anger has a price, your trauma has a price, your burnout has a price. The system doesn't want you informed, it wants you engaged. So when people feel used, drained, and dissatisfied all the time, that's not personal failure, that's design. We stopped being customers, people with leverage, and became consumers, people to be managed. And once you understand that, you stop asking, what's wrong with me? And start asking, who does this setup actually work for?
Okay, so I'll quickly react. What she's talking about, she's touching on the central points of Karl Marx, and she doesn't realize it. She's touching on the central points of Engels, of Lenin. She's touching on the central points of every communist ever, and she doesn't realize it. And I don't want this to be a holier than thou intelligentsia versus whatever. No, 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 no. That's not what this is. This is great. Okay. And for the comrades out there, like, like I said, I mentioned him earlier, like Akila Maupin, like all the communist groups out there, all the people who are on X who are not, maybe they're not active in the movement because of, maybe they're in circumstances like myself where they have, they have families, they have work, and They're just not, maybe they're just, life is not in the position that it was where they could have been more active, quote unquote. But for those of us out there who have come to the conclusions that we agree with the general concepts of Marx and etc., at least in how they explain what's wrong with our system. There may be disagreements on what to correct or how to correct it, but we agree on what's wrong, right? She's touching on that. She's not a Marxist. She doesn't read theory. She doesn't care about communism. She's not going to get into all that. Forget all the terms. She is recognizing the system. She uses the term the system. Now, she's blaming it on perhaps the wrong things or just not fully articulating where the roots are, but she's touching on things that are correct. What happened to the consumer, or what happened to the customer, right? In her concept, there's a customer and a consumer. And she's saying that, and she doesn't give a specific timeline, but basically there used to be probably an early capitalism or early modern capitalism. So post maybe 30s, 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s even. Because she said groups were first ignored, redlined, and targeted. So she's talking about black people, right? How we were kind of excluded. Even when we were freed from slavery, we had Jim Crow, and then there was informal Jim Crow, right? So informal Jim Crow, you have these red lines where it's not that we're saying you're not allowed to live here, but we're never going to sell you a house. We're not going to give you a mortgage. It's not that we're saying that we don't want you shopping here, but we're going to ignore you and basically treat you like garbage. And then you have the reverse happening where it's like an intense focus on minority groups, like over consumerism in black neighborhoods, but with junk, liquor stores, fast food restaurants, etc., etc. I've said this a few times on my channel, and I'm going to say this again. Okay, what was done to black people in America is being done to the whole of America. So what white people and other people in America are starting to find when they complain about the system, whether it's not getting their benefits back and Social Security over time because they don't live long enough, and wait, what happened to the money I put in? Or whether it's fighting wars that don't really benefit them. Well, that's World War One, World War Two for black people. Didn't do anything for black people to fight those wars. You're fighting a war to free Europe from Hitler. Well, Hitler's home. Nuremberg laws are Jim Crow laws, bro. I mean, just saying. What was done to blacks is being done to all whites. And what she's describing in general is this conversion from the customer to the consumer is this lack of respect for the individual. That you don't have the experience. And if you don't want this crappy experience, if you don't want to be treated like an animal, well, where are you going to go? Because a couple of corporations own everything. Well, there's some corporations that own everything, that own pieces of everything, like BlackRock and etc. Okay, she's close. She's really close. But what she's missing or not focusing on is, well, what happened to the consumer or the customer? How did it become a consumer? I mean, look, customers consume, right? So let's just get beyond that for a second. Customers consume. But what happened to the customer? The customer lost its purchasing power. But the customer, as I posted just below on this video that was fed out, the customer the customer was not respected in the input. Okay, so this is important. Marx talks about the tendency of the falling rate of profit, right? And this is talked about throughout communist discussions always. But let's just focus on the relationship to what she's talking about. The customer is the producer. The producer and the customer are the same thing. All right. Regular people go to work and they do things. And then they go out in the world and they buy things. They're not separate entities. But what's happened is that the customer, who is the producer, okay, made not the owner of production, not the owner of the factory, not the owner of the bank, not the owner of the West, not the owner of the economic system, but the person in it, the regular person, you and me. We're not respected. That's why you don't get the benefits you used to get if you're talking about like a middle income job. Like you're not getting the Christmas bonus. You're not getting the company car. You're not getting the the expense account, etc., or not the size. So you're getting questioned more heavily when you overspend. You're not flying business class when you fly for work. You know, there's many things. I can go on and on and on. No pensions anymore in private jobs. So if you want a pension, you really need to work in a public service job. You need to work in a public unionized job. If you're working at for an insurance company or a bank, there used to be pensions. There's no pension now. There's no pension. Why is that? Because you're not valued like you used to be. You're not valued like you were in the 1950s. Okay. So the door has been opened up to more people, and more people are treated with less respect. That's 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 what's happened. Okay. And if you think about it at a lower, or in the working class, quote unquote, is the factory worker respected more now, customer to consumer, as she puts it? No. Why is that? Well, two reasons. One, human input is not valued. So the person that spends a lot of time producing something is not, that product is not, it's not priced or thought of as how much time it took for it to be made, because what's happening is the producer of that product, that person is never being paid anywhere near what they would need to purchase their own product. So if you work on a factory line that produces Mercedes, right, in Alabama, how much does the average Mercedes cost? Probably like what, $50,000? Do you think that the average person on that factory line makes enough in purchasing power to be able to buy a Mercedes? No, there's no way. There's no way. They can't, because that would affect profit too much. So the way that the capitalists, and I again, I'm trying to stay away from using those terms because I don't want to scare people off. But the way that the owners of businesses make money, they have fixed costs, okay? And the only a real adjustable cost besides the implementation of machinery to reduce human input, okay, and the occasional fluctuation of energy costs, and maybe finding ways to get cheaper components to put into their product, is truly through how much money they can extract from human labor. So if you work 8 hours a day and you produce a ton of stuff, you what they choose to pay you is the only part of the equation that's a choice. They have to buy goods and services. So they have to buy the metal. They have to buy the bolts. They have to buy the gasoline and the oil that's needed for the trucks that they have to pay to ship the goods and services to whomever is buying them. But the one part that's a real choice on their part is how much they pay you to work there. Well, what they pay you is where they make their profit, because they can't pay you enough to own the products that they are selling. If they do that, then they lose money. So they have to pay you less, right? They have to skim off of the human labor in order to make the money that they need from the final end product. And that's what that is, and I'll play the clip. So here.
Does not work. This is called the problem of overproduction. The problem of overproduction is this. If you have a product that you're creating, you're going to need supplies to create it. So that's A. A is the supplies that you would need to produce your product. A. On top of that, you're going to need to ship the products. So that would be B, right? You're going to need to ship the products. That's going to be B. On top of that, you're going to have your labor costs, right? You're going to have to pay workers to assemble the product. You're going to have labor. So that's C. So A plus B plus C, and then you have the final cost of the product, D, right? That's all the components that go into the ultimate cost of the product. However, what's missing here? A plus B plus C. The shipping, the materials, and the labor costs all add up to the price. You're missing something, which is profits. The capitalist has to make profits. And he can't change how much the shipping costs are, and he can't change how much the material costs. So how does the capitalist make profits? He cuts into C. He takes from the worker. And this is called surplus value. He cuts in to the value the worker puts into the product. He takes a percentage of that value for himself. That's called surplus value. So you can divide C. C divides into C1, which is what the worker actually gets paid, and C2, which is the profits that the capitalist gets. So C is divided into C1, which is what the worker gets paid, and C2, which is the profits the capitalist extracts from the product. But here is the problem. So the worker is only getting paid C1.
Here it comes.
C1 does not equal D. C1 does not equal D. The worker cannot buy back what he produces. The cost of the product is D. And C1 can never equal D. There's no way that the worker can be paid enough to buy back what he produces. And that is the built-in problem of capitalism, the problem of overproduction. And that gets compounded by the fact that the capitalist is constantly trying to reduce the role of C in production. The capitalist wants to hire as few workers as he possibly can. However, the profits of the capitalist can only come from C2. He can only extract surplus value from labor. He can't extract surplus value from the cost of the machine. He can't extract surplus value from the materials. He can only extract surplus value from the cost of C2. So on top of the problem that the worker can never buy back what he produces, the problem of overproduction, you also have the problem that as technology advances, C2 is constantly decreasing. And this is called the tendency of the falling rate of profit, that C2 is always decreasing. And that the more technology advances, the less the rate of profits that the capitalist makes. The worker can never buy back what he produces. On top of that, he can never, he constantly sees a falling rate of profits due to technology. This is the built-in problem of the capitalist system.
Just one
and the
more
more
time
advanced
for
technology
clarification.
can only extract surplus value from labor. He can't extract surplus value from the cost of the machine. He can't extract surplus value from the materials. He can only extract surplus value from the cost of C2. So on top of the problem that the worker can never buy back what he produces, the problem of overproduction, you also have the problem that as technology advances, C2 is constantly decreasing.
So the input from people, the input of human labor, which is where the owners of our system have to get their... Apologize, that was an alarm that went off in my house. So C2 is where they get their profit because that's the only place where they can extract profit. But as that goes down, right? As the human input goes down, right? Because of everybody competing and putting in new technologies in order to reduce human labor, to reduce the amount of human input, because that's the only place that they can extract that profit from. Well, as that goes down, you have a falling rate of profit. So this is a huge built-in destruction, or I guess it's like a like a self-destructive nature of the whole system. There's no way to continuously grow without having a falling rate of profit. So you need more stuff. You need to produce more stuff in volume to make up for what you would have had before. Not to mention that the consumer, who is the producer, doesn't make the money back. They don't have the money to go out and purchase your product. It's a struggle. So you just have to find ways to produce more and more and more and more. Well, what happens? In the West, what happened was all these products were moved to Asia. They were moved to places where they could produce them cheaper and then sell them back. Well, what is that? That's part of the colonial / imperialist stage, because we took advantage of other developing nations in order to pay those people even less, minuscule amounts, so that we could produce the products that we needed from those countries and then bring them back to the first world countries to then sell and have the first world citizens purchase them with first world dollars so that people could make the profit. So you're producing them at a minimum amount, selling them at a maximum amount, and then you get to sell back to the third world high valued things, right? By keeping them poor, they never have the ability to develop to a point where they become equal consumers and equal producers and creators. They are just your factory. That was the system. But then what's happened is that now in a lot of these places, they have developed and there's a rising cost on their side of production. Okay. But that's a kind of getting into a separate conversation. But the point is that it got so bad in the West that the West had to remove the production from the West. That's why you hear people say, oh, they don't make anything here anymore. They don't make it here anymore. They can't. It doesn't work. And she's worried about customer consumer relationship, and she's right, there is a change, but that change first came from the fact that this is built-in problem with the system. But then it comes to something else, and that is this. Oh, sorry. This is the Soviet Union. No, that wasn't it. That's another topic. It is this bad boy. So, the Great Prosperity of 1947 to 1979. This is the heart of the capitalist system really at play. You don't feel it as a Westerner. I grew up, in the late 80s, in the 90s, and early 2000s, right? So you don't feel it as much here, but it really is over back in the 70s, and now we're all feeling it, right? So this is a great, great, great example and explanation. So pay rose with productivity. Wages and overall consumption for production and non-supervisory workers, now about 82% of the private sector workforce, tracked steadily upward alongside the gains in productivity. So, for example, as the U.S. was producing lots of steel, and U.S. Steel was selling steel all over the world to help rebuild the world after horrific wars. And the U.S. government opened up markets, so U.S. Steel was able to go and send their steel everywhere. The steel workers' wages were going up, and there were lots of them, right? And it's the same thing with every other sector of the economy. So this is where capitalism was producing enough for enough people that the argument of the system not working was really hard. Okay? This is where it was hard. This is also at the same time, where in the mid late 50s, especially in the 60s, you see this Khrushchev secret speech where he dumps on Stalin, and you see a real beginning of the end of the Soviet Union because they start to pivot away from what was working for them, and this leads to the reforms. It leads to the perestroika and the Gorbachev and the Yeltsins of the world, because they start to look at the West and they're like, hey, there's all this money and people are rich and all this stuff. What's going on? And the foundation they didn't stick to. Okay, but forget about that. Just focus on America here. The rising value of goods and services per worker meant rising pay. But that relationship ended in the 70s. Now, this is where this young lady's customer consumer relationship, where she's like, oh, we used to be customers and we're value, whatever. Well, what happened? Your wages didn't keep up. Now, what happened in the early 70s that might be an impact to this? Now, per Caleb Maupin and many other people, they're focusing on the tendency of the falling rate of profit, which is absolutely true. There's something that happened in the West. There's an event that happened, and that is that the U.S. decided to suspend this was Nixon. He suspended the convertibility of dollars to gold temporarily. It was never restored. So what did that do? That meant that the U.S. dollar wasn't backed by convertibility to gold anymore, which means that you didn't have to have a percentage of gold in reserve behind the dollar. So now you could print more money as the Federal Reserve and remit it to the US government, and the US government could then put that into the economy in order to pay for things like, I don't know, Vietnam and all the other projects and all the other stuff that they had to pay. Oh, but what happens when you do that? Monetary inflation. You're putting so many more dollars into the system, right? And you're killing the ability of people to have to maintain the value of the dollar in their wallet. So now you have the money printing machine and the depreciation of the dollar rapidly. And what else is going on? All of these US businesses that were keeping the wages up with productivity, they start moving them overseas to Japan, to China, to Vietnam eventually, to all over the world, because the capitalist is going through that tendency of the falling rate of profit. So they have to keep it going by moving production away, maximizing profit, right? So now the US worker, if they used to be in a producer role like a factory, they're probably losing their job or it's being reduced. But the productivity numbers are still going up. What else is happening? Implementation of technology. Okay, so now you have computers in private sector businesses like banks and law firms and you name it, insurance companies. So people are more productive than ever. What used to take maybe hours on a physical spreadsheet is now done very quickly on a computerized spreadsheet. Now you have programs that run things that humans used to do all the calculations. Now you can send emails. Now there's all kinds of use of technology to expedite productivity. So productivity is going through the roof. Well, where is the pay in relationship to that productivity? It is flatlined. So average hourly worker pay doesn't go up. McDonald's is automating their process. You don't have to hand cut the fries. You don't have to do any of the, you have machines that help to season. There's all kinds of stuff going on in that production line. But the McDonald's worker isn't making money relative to the production anymore. And the banker, the analyst, they make good money, quote unquote. But according to this chart, it's not keeping up with their productivity. We're flatlining, folks. The factors of the way that we produce money itself, the fact that it's all created from debt, the fact that it wasn't tied to gold anymore, the fact that you have a built-in self-destruction of the falling of the tendency of the falling rate of profit, all these things crushed the customer into this consumer that she's talking about. So you don't have the purchasing power anymore. So you have to be volume. So you have to be, it's not you walking into a store and they value you as that individual customer. You ever walk into a car dealership and have someone running over to you and they ask you, can they get you water? Can they sit you down and go over? Why do they treat you like that at the car dealership? Because they don't sell 1,000 cars a day. And if you happen to be the customer that has the money to buy a car, you're a king. Now, they're going to screw you because cars are overpriced and rates are terrible, and et cetera, et cetera. But the concept is there. When you walk into Walmart, are you treated like a king? When you walk into Costco, are you treated like a king? Is anybody rushing over to you to get you water and sit you down? And, hey, can I get a test drive on any of ours? No. Now, they have stands where you could sample stuff. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is that the way that we treat our customers is reflective of how we value them. And you don't value the consumer that doesn't have purchasing power. And you don't value the consumer if you didn't value them as the producer. And there's one more point I want to make about this. And this is very important. In this area, The 80s, the 90s, the 2000s. What's not showing here is the upper middle class and the rich, not the people that own the society, not the Rothschilds, the Warburgs, et cetera, et cetera. I'm not talking about that stuff, right? Rockefellers, whatever, whatever you think. I'm not talking about those people. I'm talking about the guys that maybe own the basketball teams, the football teams, the dealerships, the fast food chains, the private restaurant groups, the people that own whatever in society, right? The people that own the real estate companies. Their line is here. It's not shown. Their line went up with productivity. Okay? Their line went up with productivity. So what happened is because they were being fed compensation that was commensurate with productivity. They're the board of directors that's getting huge bonuses, right? They're the ones who are getting fed the massive stock buyback programs, the the Christmas bonus or the buyouts, etc. These people who are invisible on this chart, they're the ones who are able to keep up with productivity in terms of pay, and they're the ones who can turn around and buy all of the assets that these people can't. So they can buy all the houses, they can buy all the car dealerships, they can buy all the restaurants, they can own everything that these people, which is regular people, so here's your analyst, your banker, here's your Amazon worker, your McDonald's worker, all these people here are purchasing from this invisible line. And this is why the people in the media will defend the system until they die, because they are getting compensation. They are getting millions of dollars to tell you lies every night on the news. They're keeping up relatively with inflation. They are getting all of the leakage from productivity money. You're not getting any of it. That's why there's such a disparity in the West between the rich and the poor, because the quote unquote rich, okay, not the people that own the society, but the people that you see, okay, because you don't see the people that own society. You never see them. They're invisible. The people that are just rich, who drive around in the Maybachs, and the people who, maybe in their limousines and flying private jets and et cetera, they're getting the leakage from this line. Okay? They're getting it. They're here. They're the ones who are benefiting from all this. And that's why they'll defend the system, because the system does work. It just doesn't work for you. That's what she doesn't understand. And that's what the point of this chart, combined with her complaints, combined with his explanation, that's what's going on in the United States. That's what's going on in the West. The customer was always the producer, and the producer is now a feeble consumer who only has value by volume. And that person is getting hit from two sides. It's getting hit from the fact that the system doesn't work in the long term for the expansion of profit or the expansion of pay to keep up with potential profits. It doesn't work. And the money that the person who is the producer is making is getting siphoned off in value by the fact that from the early 70s on, the people that actually own the money can print it in volume. And when they print it in volume, it deflates the value that you already have in your wallet. And when Nixon did this convertibility, people would argue, well, we're still the reserve currency. Yeah, you're the reserve currency of the world. That's right. But the problem is, as an American, right, you're the reserve currency of the world. You're losing your factory job. You're not keeping up with inflation. And the Fed is printing a ton of money. That money goes into circulation. Well, part of the reason they have to print a lot of money is because when Kissinger, not only do they want to pay for things like the Vietnam War, et cetera, which they pay for things like that now, but Kissinger goes to the Saudis and says, hey, you're going to buy and sell oil in dollars. Well, when you buy and sell oil in dollars, what happens? People have to convert their currency to dollars to be able to purchase oil. Well, oil was the lifeblood of the energy sector and it still is to a large degree, but it certainly was from the 70s, at the point with Kissinger making that informal agreement. So what happens? When you convert your currency to dollars, there's fees. Those fees come back. Okay, those fees come back to the people that own the currency. So it comes back to the government, and then it goes back to the private bank. You have to pay them back with interest. So there's an incentive to flood the market with currency that people have to use. Think of the dollar like a can of soda. My can of soda. If you need my can of soda to get a banana, and you need my can of soda to buy a car, and you need my can of soda for toilet paper, what's going to happen? You're going to have to get your hands on my can of soda. But here's the catch. I'm not giving you my can of soda. You're going to have to pay for it with a little interest. So I want a few extra of whatever it is you're exchanging for my can of soda. Well, I'm going to make profit then by producing more cans of soda and driving up the cost of everything. So you need more cans of soda, and you have to get those cans of soda from me. So I'm going to hit you, and you're going to need more. Well, guess who gets hurt on that? As Mike Benz would say, that favors the empire, but it hurts the homeland. Because guess who sits and has a few dollars in their pocket that just got a lot poorer and they didn't do anything but get up and go to work? The American consumer. The American consumer. You're not the customer anymore, she would say. You're the consumer. You just got poorer because of the system that uses your currency. Congratulations, folks. A bunch of people that had no interest in arguing about systems just exposed for themselves why the system isn't working. Thank you very much, everyone.